Millionaire finds his ex-wife and triplets on the floor. The truth changes everything. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Maxwell Reed adjusted his Armani tie as he gazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Brasserie Lumiere, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. The city lights twinkled below like stars, each representing lives with purpose while he sat alone at a table meant for two. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Reed?" the waiter asked, hovering respectfully. "Just the check," Maxwell replied without looking up. At 38, he had built Reed Innovations into a financial empire spanning 3 continents. His net worth exceeded $5 billion. By all measurable standards, Maxwell Reed had achieved extraordinary success. Yet as he sipped his 30-year-old scotch, the familiar emptiness spread through his chest, the same hollow void that greeted him each morning in his penthouse and followed him to his corner office with its imposing mahogany desk. His phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor, his stepmother and chairwoman of the board. "Tokyo deal locked. 9 figures. Celebrate, Maxwell." He didn't reply. Another deal, another million. The numbers had lost their meaning years ago. His mind drifted to Jessica, her smile, the way she challenged him, how she made him feel alive. 5 years since he'd driven her away, and still the wound felt fresh. "We want different things, Maxwell," she had said that final day. "You want an empire. I want a life." He had let her walk away when she revealed her pregnancy, convinced his vision for Reed Innovations was worth any sacrifice. Now, surrounded by everything money could buy, he wondered if it had been the greatest mistake of his life. A commotion outside caught his attention. On the street below, a small gathering had formed. From his elevated position, Maxwell could see a woman with a cardboard sign, her shoulders hunched against the cold autumn wind. Curiosity drew him closer to the window. The woman turned slightly, and something about her seemed hauntingly familiar. She approached a nearby shelter entrance and embraced 3 small boys who emerged from the shadows, identical triplets no more than 5 years old. Maxwell felt the blood drain from his face. Even from this distance, he could see their bright, green eyes and distinctive jawline, Reed traits passed down for generations. 3 perfect miniature versions of himself. The crystal tumbler slipped from Maxwell's hand, shattering on the polished floor. He barely noticed the commotion as waiters rushed to clean up. His eyes remained fixed on the street below, on Jessica and the 3 boys. His sons. The sons he never knew existed. Maxwell abandoned his half-eaten dinner, leaving a $100 bill on the table as he rushed toward the elevator. His heart hammered against his ribs. The image of those 3 identical faces burned into his mind. "Sir, your coat," a waiter called after him, but Maxwell was already gone. "We should go," Jessica whispered urgently to the boys, her eyes never leaving Maxwell's face. The years had been unkind to her. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled, back in a simple ponytail, clothes worn but clean. "Please wait," Maxwell said, finding his voice. "Just give me a minute." The tallest boy stepped slightly forward, his small chin raised in a protective gesture Maxwell recognized from his own childhood. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, eyes never leaving Maxwell. "Yes, Connor," Jessica replied softly. "This is an old friend." Maxwell couldn't tear his gaze away from the children. "How old are they?" he demanded, though he already knew the answer. 5, she answered, barely audible. 5 years. The math wasn't difficult. Jessica must have been pregnant when he'd dismissed her from his life, when he'd said a baby would complicate things during the company's crucial expansion phase. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked with emotion. Jessica glanced at the boys who were watching this exchange with confusion. "I'm hungry," the smallest of the triplets said, tugging at Jessica's coat. The simple statement hit Maxwell like a physical blow. His sons were hungry while he dined on Wagyu beef and expensive scotch. "Come with me," he said. "All of you. Please." Jessica hesitated, uncertainty written across her features. Maxwell saw pride warring with practicality in her eyes. "Just dinner," he added softly. Then we'll talk. After what felt like an eternity, Jessica nodded. Okay, she said, gathering the boys closer. Just dinner. As Maxwell hailed a taxi, one of the boys, not Connor but another with a curious glint in his eye, looked up at him. You look like us, the boy said simply. Maxwell's throat tightened as he met the child's gaze. Yes, he managed to reply. I suppose I do. Maxwell guided them to a small family restaurant nearby, instinctively starting toward his usual high-end establishments before catching Jessica's warning glance and redirecting somewhere more appropriate. Seated in a corner booth with worn vinyl seats, Maxwell could barely focus on the menu in his hands. The three boys, Connor, Wesley, and Parker, sat across from him, devouring plates of spaghetti with the enthusiasm only hungry children could muster. They're good eaters, Maxwell said awkwardly, searching for anything to break the tension. Jessica's lips twitched into a small smile despite herself. They're growing boys. Connor, the protective one, kept watching Maxwell suspiciously while methodically twirling pasta around his fork. Wesley, whom Maxwell was learning was the creative one, studied Maxwell's expensive watch with obvious curiosity. Parker, the thoughtful observer, hadn't taken his eyes off Maxwell's face since they sat down. Why do you look like us? Parker finally asked, his small voice cutting through the silence. Parker, Jessica admonished gently. Remember what we talked about asking personal questions. Maxwell leaned forward slightly. It's okay, he said. Sometimes people look alike by coincidence. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but Jessica's grateful glance told him it was the right move. For now. Boys, Jessica suddenly said, would you like ice cream for dessert? The question successfully diverted the children's attention. When the waitress left with their enthusiastic orders, Jessica turned to Maxwell. 5 minutes, she whispered. I'll take them to see the fish tank by the entrance. That should give us time to talk. As the boys pressed their small hands against the aquarium glass, pointing excitedly at colorful fish, Jessica slipped back into the booth, her expression guarded. Ask what you need to ask, she said quietly. When did you find out you were pregnant? Maxwell began, his voice low. 3 weeks after you told me to leave. And you didn't think I deserved to know? Jessica's eyes flashed. I called your office, Maxwell. 3 times. Your assistant said you were too busy to take personal calls. After the 3rd time, I decided our children wouldn't spend their lives being too personal for your schedule. Maxwell felt as if he'd been punched. He remembered his former assistant, Diana, who had protected his time zealously during the company's expansion phase. I never got those messages, he said quietly. Jessica's expression softened slightly. Would it have mattered? You made it abundantly clear what your priorities were the day I told you I was pregnant. You called it an inconvenient complication to your 5-year plan. Maxwell winced at the memory. He had been ruthless, focused only on Reed Innovations' international expansion. I was wrong, he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. I was young, ambitious. So was I, Jessica interrupted. But I didn't have the luxury of walking away from responsibility. Maxwell glanced at the boys, still fascinated by the tropical fish. Tell me about them, please. For the first time, Jessica's expression warmed. Connor is the oldest by 4 minutes. He's my little protector. Wesley lives in his imagination. He draws constantly. And Parker notices everything, always asking why. They're wonderful. They are, Maxwell said. Despite everything, they're happy children. She hesitated. What do you want, Maxwell? Why did you follow us? Before he could answer, the boys rushed back to the table, full of excitement about a pufferfish they'd spotted. Time to go, Jessica said, gathering her worn purse. It's past their bedtime. Tomorrow, Maxwell said quickly. Central Park, by the carousel. At 2 hours, please. Jessica hesitated, then nodded slightly. We'll see. As they prepared to leave, Parker turned back, his green eyes, so like Maxwell's own, fixing on him with uncanny perception. Bye, the boy said softly, raising a small hand in farewell. Goodbye, Parker, Maxwell replied, his voice thick with emotion. I'll see you tomorrow. Back in his penthouse, Maxwell paced the spacious living room, unable to settle. The evening's events played on loop in his mind. His children, his sons, had been living in poverty while he accumulated wealth he rarely even enjoyed. He poured himself a drink, but set it down untouched. For the first time in years, he needed clarity, not numbness. His phone had been buzzing relentlessly. 12 missed calls from Eleanor, 3 from Thomas Porter, his childhood friend and now the company's legal counsel. Maxwell ignored them all. Instead, he opened his laptop and typed Jessica Wells into the search bar. There was almost nothing, just a 5-year-old employment record at a design firm and a brief mention in a community college alumni newsletter. She had vanished from the digital world, while his own name yielded thousands of results. Their lives had diverged so completely. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Maxwell canceled 3 meetings, ignoring Eleanor's increasingly irate messages. For the first time in his adult life, Maxwell Reed had put business second. He arrived at Central Park an hour early, nervously pacing around the carousel. He had barely slept, his mind racing with images of 3 identical boys who shared his DNA. When 2 unapproached, Maxwell scanned every path for Jessica and the boys. What if she didn't come? What if she'd changed her mind? The thought sent a wave of panic through him. Then he saw them. 4 figures approaching from the east path. Jessica looked different in daylight, her brown hair catching golden highlights from the sun. She wore simple jeans and a faded sweater but carried herself with quiet dignity. The boys bounded ahead of her, matching blue jackets making them look like a small coordinated team. You came. Maxwell breathed when they reached. Him, Jessica nodded, a tentative smile touching her lips. I promised we would. The boys stared up at him with varying expressions. Connor stood slightly in front of the others, his protective instinct on display. Wesley clutched a small sketchbook, studying Maxwell like he wanted to draw him. Parker simply tilted his head as if trying to solve a puzzle. Boys, Jessica said gently, this is Mr. Reed. He's going to spend some time with us today. You can call me Maxwell, he offered, crouching down to their level. Wesley stepped forward first. Do you like dinosaurs? He asked seriously. Maxwell smiled, feeling the first crack in the wall of tension. I love dinosaurs. The afternoon at Central Park had been magical. Maxwell had discovered that Connor loved soccer. Wesley could name every dinosaur that ever existed, and Parker had an uncanny ability to solve puzzles meant for children twice his age. For a few precious hours, Maxwell forgot about Reed Innovations and the empire he'd built. As the sun began to set, Jessica gently announced it was time to leave. Maxwell reluctantly said goodbye, securing a promise to see them again the following weekend. The warm glow of the day stayed with him as his driver took him back to his penthouse. For the first time in years, Maxwell felt something dangerously close to happiness. That feeling evaporated the moment he stepped into his living room and found Eleanor Reed waiting for him. At 62, Eleanor remained an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the same green eyes all Reeds possessed. After Maxwell's parents died in a yacht accident when he was 12, Eleanor had raised him with a singular focus on business success. Your assistant tells me you've been canceling meetings, Eleanor said without preamble. The Tokyo investors are getting nervous. I had something important to attend to, Maxwell replied, pouring himself a glass of water. More important than the deal we've spent 9 months negotiating? Eleanor's voice was dangerously calm. What exactly is going on, Maxwell? Maxwell hesitated. He had planned to approach this conversation carefully, but Eleanor's network of informants had clearly alerted her to something unusual. I found Jessica, he said finally. Eleanor's expression hardened. Jessica Wells? Your ex-wife? The one who walked out on you? She didn't walk out, Maxwell corrected. I pushed her away. And she has children. 3 boys. My sons. Eleanor went completely still. What did you just say? Triplets, 5 years old. They're mine, Eleanor. One look at them and there's no question. She shows up after 5 years with 3 convenient children who look like reeds, just as your net worth crosses the 4 billion mark, Eleanor laughed humorlessly. And you believe this? I saw them. They're mine. Eleanor moved to the bar and poured herself a scotch. Even if they are, and that's a significant if without proper testing, where has she been for 5 years? Why reveal them now? I found her by accident, Maxwell explained. She tried to contact me when she was pregnant. My assistant blocked her calls. How convenient for her story, Eleanor said dismissively. This woman abandoned you and now she's manipulating you with these supposed children. Maxwell felt his temper flare. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Eleanor set down her glass with deliberate care. I've seen this before, Maxwell. Women targeting wealthy men using children as leverage. Your own father nearly lost everything in his first divorce. This isn't like that, Maxwell insisted. It's exactly like that. Eleanor's voice softened to the mentoring tone she'd used throughout Maxwell's youth. You've worked too hard to let emotions cloud your judgment. Now, if these children really are yours, we'll handle it properly. DNA. Tests, support arrangements, trust funds with appropriate controls. They're not a business transaction, Maxwell said, his voice rising. Everything in life is a transaction, Eleanor replied coldly. I taught you that? Maxwell stared at his stepmother, suddenly seeing the coldness that had shaped his own worldview. Maybe that's the problem. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Be very careful, Maxwell. Your position at Reed Innovations isn't as secure as you might think. The board serves at my pleasure. Is that a threat? It's a reminder of reality, Eleanor said, moving toward the door. Get those DNA tests. Use Thomas. He's discreet. And until we know for certain, keep your distance from this situation. After Eleanor left, Maxwell sank onto his sofa, conflict churning inside him. The business side of him, the side Eleanor had carefully cultivated, knew his stepmother's warnings weren't entirely unreasonable. But another part of him, a part long suppressed by ambition, rejected the cold analysis. He had held Wesley's small hand, seen Connor's protective instinct, witnessed Parker's quiet intelligence. Maxwell picked up his phone and called Thomas Porter. I need your help, he said when his friend answered. But this stays between us. Eleanor can't know. The modest apartment building in Queens stood in stark contrast to Maxwell's gleaming Manhattan penthouse. He checked the address Thomas had obtained for him one more time, before pressing the buzzer for apartment 3B. Jessica's surprised voice came through the intercom. Maxwell, you're early. I brought breakfast, he replied, holding up a bag of pastries, though she couldn't see him. A moment later, the door buzzed open. Maxwell climbed 2 flights of stairs, suddenly nervous. This would be his first time seeing where his sons lived. Jessica opened the door before he could knock. She wore simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Behind her, the sounds of cartoons and children's laughter filtered through. You didn't have to bring anything, she said, eyeing the bag and the gift-wrapped packages under his arm. I wanted to, Maxwell replied. May I come in? Jessica hesitated briefly before stepping aside. The apartment was small, but meticulously clean. Mismatched furniture filled the living room, and children's artwork covered the refrigerator. Despite its simplicity, it felt more like a home than Maxwell's designer-decorated penthouse ever had. The boys were sprawled on the floor watching TV, but scrambled up when they saw him. Maxwell, Wesley exclaimed, running over. Did you bring your dinosaur book? Even better. Maxwell smiled, setting down his packages. I brought dinosaur models you can build yourself. Wesley's eyes widened. Really? After breakfast, Jessica interjected, giving Maxwell a look that clearly said, don't spoil them. As they ate pastries around the small kitchen table, Maxwell observed the family dynamic. Jessica maintained gentle but firm boundaries with the boys. They, in turn, showed a level of independence and responsibility that surprised him. "Parker, it's your turn to clear the table," Jessica reminded. Without complaint, the quietest triplet began gathering plates. Maxwell found himself automatically helping, earning a surprised glance from Jessica. "We're going to the museum today," Jessica explained as they finished cleaning up. "The Natural History Museum has free admission on Saturdays." "I know," Maxwell replied. "That's why I came early. I thought maybe I could join you." Jessica studied him carefully. The boys would like that. The museum trip was eye-opening for Maxwell. Watching his sons explore the dinosaur exhibits with unbridled enthusiasm, he glimpsed what family life could be. Not the sterile, achievement-oriented childhood Eleanor had crafted for him, but something joyful and genuine. In the Hall of Gems, Parker tugged on Maxwell's sleeve. "Why are some rocks shiny and some not?" he asked. Maxwell knelt down to Parker's level, explaining mineral formation in simple terms. The boy's intense focus reminded Maxwell of himself at that age, before Eleanor's. Influence had narrowed his interest to only profitable pursuits. "You're good with them," Jessica said quietly as they watched the boys press their faces against a display case of meteorites. "They make it easy," Maxwell replied. "They're amazing kids, Jessica. You've done an incredible job." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It hasn't been easy. I want to help," Maxwell said. "Not just with money, though that too, if you'll let me. I want to be part of their lives." "Why?" Jessica asked directly. "Is it guilt? Curiosity? What happens when the novelty wears off?" Before Maxwell could answer, Connor approached, his expression serious. "Mom, Wesley's crying." They found Wesley in the gift shop, staring longingly at an expensive dinosaur encyclopedia. "It's okay, buddy," Jessica soothed. "We can look for it at the library." Maxwell reached for his wallet, but Jessica's warning glance stopped him. He understood her concern. She didn't want the boys to see him as a source of gifts and money. Instead, he knelt beside Wesley. "You know what? I have that same book at home. Maybe next time you visit, we can look at it together." Wesley wiped his eyes. "We can visit your house?" The question hung in the air. Maxwell looked to Jessica, who gave a small nod. "Yes," Maxwell said, feeling a surge of hope. "If your mom agrees, you could come next weekend." "With the swimming pool?" Parker asked, appearing beside his brother. Maxwell laughed. "Yes, with the swimming pool." As they left the museum, Maxwell felt Connor's small hand slip into his. The gesture, so simple yet profound, made his throat tight with emotion. For the first time, Maxwell Reed understood what real wealth looked like. Maxwell's penthouse had never felt so alive. The sound of children's laughter echoed through rooms that had known only business calls and solitary silence. "This pool is huge," Wesley exclaimed, staring wide-eyed at the indoor swimming area. "Bigger than our whole apartment," Connor added, unusually impressed. Jessica stood back, arms crossed and expression guarded, as she watched the boys explore. Maxwell had hired a swimming instructor, and the triplets were having their first proper swimming lesson. "They're natural swimmers," the instructor commented as Parker performed a perfect flutter kick. "Their grandfather was a champion swimmer in college," Maxwell said, the words surprising him. He rarely spoke of his father. Jessica raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Later, as the boys devoured pizza on the terrace overlooking Central Park, Maxwell and Jessica stood by the kitchen island, speaking in low voices. "They're asking questions," Jessica said, "about who you are, why you look like them." Maxwell nodded. "I've been thinking about that too. We need to tell them," she continued. "Soon, before they start creating their own explanations. Are you sure they're ready?" "Are you?" Jessica countered. Maxwell looked out at his sons, their faces animated as they chattered over their meal. The DNA test results Thomas had quietly arranged had merely confirmed what Maxwell already knew in his heart. "Yes," he said finally. "When do you think we should do it?" "Today," Jessica replied. "Before we leave." They're comfortable here, having fun. It's a good moment. Maxwell felt his heart race, but nodded in agreement. After lunch, they gathered in the living room. The boys sensed something important was happening and settled on the couch without being asked, shoulder to shoulder in matching blue t-shirts. Boys, Jessica began gently. Remember how you've asked about your dad before? 3 heads nodded, in unison. And you've noticed that Maxwell looks a lot like you, she continued. He has our eyes. Parker observed. Jessica smiled softly. Yes, he does. She took a deep breath. That's because Maxwell is your father. The room fell completely silent. Maxwell felt as if he might shatter from the tension. Wesley spoke first. Like a real dad? Not just someone who looks like us? A real dad, Maxwell confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. Connor's brow furrowed. But where were you? All the other kids have dads who live with them or visit on weekends. The question hit Maxwell like a physical blow. Jessica reached over and squeezed his hand, surprising both of them with the gesture of support. That's my fault, Maxwell admitted. I didn't know about you boys until I saw you last month outside the restaurant. Mom didn't tell you? Parker asked, his perceptive gaze shifting between the adults. I tried, Jessica explained carefully, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. I should have tried harder, and Maxwell should have been easier to reach. The important thing, Maxwell added, is that I know now, and I want very much to be your father if you'll let me. The triplets exchanged glances, having one of those silent communications that amazed Maxwell. Parker slid off the couch first and approached Maxwell. Can I call you Dad? He asked simply. Maxwell knelt down, meeting his son's eyes. I would like that more than anything. Parker wrapped his arms around Maxwell's neck, and something broke open inside Maxwell's chest. Dam of emotion he hadn't known existed suddenly gave way. Wesley joined the hug next. Does this mean we get to come swimming every weekend? Maxwell laughed through the tightness in his throat. It means I'll be part of your lives in every way I can be. Only Connor remained on the couch, watching cautiously. Jessica sat beside Connor. It's okay to need time, Connor. This is big news. The boy twisted his hands together. If you're our dad, he asked Maxwell directly, are you going to take us away from Mom? No, Maxwell answered immediately. Your mom is amazing. She's taken care of you all by herself for 5 years. We're going to work together now, but nothing will change how important she is. Connor studied him for a long moment before nodding once and sliding off the couch. He didn't hug Maxwell, but offered his hand for a solemn handshake. Okay, Connor said, but you have to promise not to leave again. Maxwell shook his son's hand, feeling the weight of the moment. I promise, Connor. I'm here for good. Maxwell sat in his corner office staring blankly at quarterly projections that would normally command his full attention. The numbers showed record growth for Reed Innovations, but his mind was elsewhere, filled with images of 3 little boys with his eyes. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts before the door swung open without waiting for a response. Eleanor strode in, radiating displeasure. You missed the Singapore call, Eleanor said, dropping into the chair across from Maxwell's desk. Lynn was asking for you specifically. Something came up, Maxwell replied vaguely. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. Something more important than the deal we've been chasing for months? Yes. The simple answer clearly caught Eleanor off guard. Maxwell leaned back, suddenly exhausted by the prospect of explaining. But Eleanor wasn't just his stepmother, she was chairwoman of the board. She deserved to know why the CEO of Reed Innovations had suddenly shifted priorities. The DNA results came back, Maxwell said. The boys are mine. 100% certainty. Eleanor's expression darkened. I assumed as much. I've already had legal working on appropriate support arrangements. It's not about support arrangements, Maxwell interrupted. I told them I'm their father. I'm going to be part of their lives. Of course you are, Eleanor said dismissively, in an appropriate capacity. Weekend visits, perhaps holidays. We'll set up trust funds for education. I'm picking them up from school today, Maxwell cut in. Wesley has an art show. I promised I'd be there. Eleanor went completely still. You're leaving the office early today? When we have the Tokyo presentation to finalize? Thomas can handle that. Thomas? Eleanor scoffed. Thomas Porter is a competent lawyer, but he doesn't have your vision. For expansion. Maxwell's phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. Boys are excited about you coming to Wesley's art show. He's been talking about it all week. A smile touched Maxwell's lips, and something in his expression made Eleanor lean forward. This woman has you completely distracted, Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. She waited 5 years to tell you about these children, and now suddenly you're rearranging your entire life for her? For them, Maxwell corrected. My sons. You barely know them. I'm getting to know them, Maxwell countered, and they're extraordinary kids. Eleanor stood abruptly. You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, not just some father. Picking up kids from school. You have responsibilities. Yes, I do, Maxwell agreed, standing to match his stepmother's stance. To my children as well as to this company. The two stared at each other, a tension between them that had never existed before. Finally, Eleanor adjusted her perfectly tailored suit. Fine, do what you need to do. But when the board questions why our Tokyo expansion is faltering, I won't shield you from the consequences. After Eleanor left, Maxwell sank back into his chair, conflict churning inside him. His stepmother's warnings weren't entirely unreasonable. The business side of Maxwell, the side that had built an empire on calculated risk and strategic thinking, knew he should proceed cautiously. But another part of him, a part long suppressed by ambition, rejected the cold analysis. He had promised Wesley he would be there, and he intended to keep that promise. Maxwell arrived at the elementary school 30 minutes early, parking his sleek Aston Martin among minivans and sensible sedans. He felt oddly out of place in his tailored suit as he approached the school's entrance. The art show was held in the gymnasium, children's artwork displayed on colorful boards throughout the space. Maxwell scanned the room nervously until he spotted Jessica chatting with a teacher. When she saw him, surprise flickered across her face. You made it, she said, checking her watch. Early, even. I promised, Maxwell replied simply. Where's Wesley's work? Jessica led him to a display where Wesley stood proudly beside a vibrant painting of 5 figures holding hands, 3 small ones and 2 larger ones, all with bright green eyes. Dad, Wesley exclaimed, seeing Maxwell. You came. Look at my family painting. The word Dad still hit Maxwell with the force of a physical blow. He knelt down to Wesley's level, studying the artwork with genuine admiration. It's wonderful, he said, noting that Wesley had painted Jessica and himself together with the Triplets. Best painting here, I'd say. Wesley beamed. Ms. Johnson said I'm very talented for my age. Maxwell laughed. She's absolutely right. He stood up. Maxwell felt a small hand slip into his. Looking down, he was surprised to see it was Connor, the most cautious of his sons, who had taken his hand. Will you come see my science project next? Connor asked. It's about rockets. I wouldn't miss it for anything, Maxwell promised, and meant it more than any business deal he'd ever closed. Mr. Reed, the board is waiting in the conference room, Maxwell's assistant said through the intercom. Ms. Eleanor says they can't delay any longer. Maxwell glanced at his watch and then at his phone, which displayed a text from Jessica. Wesley's fever is worse, taking him to urgent care now. The Tokyo expansion meeting, the one he'd helped plan for months, was starting in 5 minutes. Meanwhile, his son was sick and Maxwell had promised Jessica he would meet them at the clinic. Tell them I won't be attending, he told his shocked assistant. Family emergency. 20 minutes later, Maxwell rushed through the doors of the urgent care clinic. Jessica looked up from the waiting room chair, surprise evident on her face. You came? She said. Of course I came. Maxwell sat beside her, immediately scanning the room. Where are Connor and Parker? My neighbor is watching them. Wesley's temperature hit 103. The school nurse called me to pick him up. Maxwell nodded, noticing the dark circles under Jessica's eyes. When was the last time you ate? She shrugged. I don't remember. Let me get you some coffee at least, Maxwell offered, squeezing her hand gently before heading to the vending machine. As the hours passed, Maxwell witnessed a side of parenting he hadn't yet experienced. The worry, the helplessness, the fierce protective instinct that surged through him when the doctor finally called Wesley's name. The normally curious and talkative boy looked small and pale on the examination table. When the doctor mentioned a blood test, Wesley's eyes widened with fear. "I don't want a needle," he whispered. Without thinking, Maxwell sat on the table and gathered Wesley into his lap. "Hey, buddy, look at me," he said gently. "Did I ever tell you about the time I had to get 7 shots in one day before a business trip to Africa?" As Maxwell spun an embellished tale about exotic animals and brave explorers, the nurse quietly took Wesley's blood. The boy was so engrossed in the story he barely flinched. Jessica watched them with an unreadable expression. Later, when the diagnosis of strep throat was confirmed and medication prescribed, Maxwell carried a sleeping Wesley to his car. "I'll drive you home," he said to Jessica, who was too exhausted to argue. At their apartment, Maxwell carefully tucked Wesley into bed and then helped Jessica get dinner for the other boys. It felt surprisingly natural, this domestic routine, so different from his boardroom battles. "Thank you," Jessica said quietly as they washed dishes side by side. "For today, for everything. I'm their father," Maxwell replied simply. "It's where I should be." His phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket, probably Eleanor or Thomas wondering where he was. But Maxwell ignored it. The next morning, Maxwell arrived at his office to find Eleanor waiting for him, fury etched into every line of her face. "You walked out on the most important board meeting of the quarter," Eleanor said without preamble. "The Tokyo investors are reconsidering." "My son was sick," Maxwell replied calmly, setting down his briefcase. "He needed me." "Your son has a mother," Eleanor snapped. "A mother who managed perfectly well for 5 years without you." Maxwell felt his temper flare. Wesley was scared. He needed his father. Eleanor's laugh was cold and humorless. "Listen to yourself. A month ago you didn't even know these children existed. Now you're throwing away everything we've built because one of them had a sore throat." "Strep throat," Maxwell corrected. "And I'm not throwing anything away. I'm balancing my responsibilities." "There is no balance," Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "Not at this level. You're either committed to this company or you're not." Maxwell studied his stepmother, the woman who raised him, who shaped him into the ruthless businessman he'd become. For the first time, he wondered if Eleanor had ever felt genuine love for anything beyond the Reed Innovations logo. "I'm committed to both my family and this company," Maxwell said firmly. Eleanor's expression hardened. "Then I'll make this simple, for you. The board meeting has been rescheduled for tomorrow morning. The Japanese delegation will be there. If you miss it, I'll call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership." Maxwell felt the blood drain from his face. "You'd force me out, after everything I've done to build this company?" "I built this company," Eleanor corrected coldly. "You've been a caretaker, a good one until now. But you're not irreplaceable, Maxwell." Eleanor moved toward the door, then paused. "Choose, Maxwell, the company or them. You can't have both." After his stepmother left, Maxwell sat at his desk, staring at the family photo Wesley had drawn, which he'd framed and placed beside his computer. His phone rang. "Jessica." "Wesley's fever broke," she said, her voice warm with relief. "He's asking for you." Maxwell closed his eyes, suddenly knowing exactly what he needed to do. The morning of the rescheduled Tokyo meeting, Maxwell arrived at Reed Innovations an hour early. The building was quiet, most employees not yet at their desks. He needed this time to prepare, not just for the presentation but for what would come after. As he passed Thomas Porter's office, he noticed the light was on. Through the glass door, Maxwell could see his childhood friend and legal counsel hunched over his desk, papers spread before him. Maxwell knocked lightly before entering. "You're here early." Thomas startled, quickly gathering the documents. "Just preparing for the meeting. Eleanor wants everything perfect." Something about Thomas's nervous manner triggered Maxwell's suspicion. What are those papers? Just legal briefs for the Tokyo deal, Thomas replied too quickly. Maxwell stepped forward, catching sight of a familiar name on one of the documents before Thomas could hide it. Is that Jessica's name? What are you doing with papers about Jessica? Thomas's face flushed. Maxwell, it's not what you think. Show me, Maxwell demanded, his voice deadly quiet. After a moment's hesitation, Thomas reluctantly slid the papers across the desk. Maxwell scanned them, his blood running cold. They were drafts of emergency custody petitions, financial investigations into Jessica's background, and a strategy for proving parental alienation. Eleanor asked me to prepare these, Thomas explained, not meeting Maxwell's eyes. Just as contingency planning. Contingency for what? Maxwell asked, though he already knew the answer. In case you decided the children should have different living arrangements? Maxwell felt physically ill. You've been spying on us? Reporting to Eleanor? Thomas had the decency to look ashamed. She's chairwoman of the board, Maxwell. When she asks for information, I can't exactly refuse. We've been friends since we were 10 years old, Maxwell said, disbelief coloring his voice. I trusted you with my family. I told myself I was protecting the company, Thomas replied weakly. Eleanor convinced me Jessica was manipulating you, that these children were a threat to everything we've built. Maxwell shook his head in disgust. They're children, Thomas. My children. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, then back at Maxwell with growing alarm. Eleanor's on her way up. The Japanese delegation arrived early. Maxwell gathered the documents about Jessica and the boys. I'll deal with you later. As he turned to leave, Thomas called after him. Maxwell, there's something else you should know. I've been meeting with Jessica. Maxwell froze. What? Eleanor suggested I should get close to her, gain her trust, see what her real motivations were. Thomas looked genuinely remorseful now. I've been telling her I could help with legal matters, offering advice about her situation. The betrayal cut deep. Does she know you're reporting everything back to Eleanor? Of course not, Thomas said quietly. She thinks I'm her friend. Maxwell's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Thomas offered to watch the boys Saturday so I could pick up an extra shift. Is that okay with you? Anger surged through Maxwell like a physical force. Stay away from my family, he warned Thomas. Or legal counsel or not, you'll regret it. In the hallway, Maxwell nearly collided with Eleanor, who was flanked by 4 Japanese businessmen in immaculate suits. Maxwell, Eleanor greeted him with a thin smile. Perfect timing. Our guests arrived earlier than expected. Maxwell composed himself, slipping the documents about Jessica into his briefcase. Mr. Tanaka, it's good to see you again, he said, bowing slightly to the eldest visitor. I hope everything is prepared for the presentation, Eleanor asked pointedly. Maxwell met his stepmother's gaze steadily. Actually, there's been a change of plans. For the next hour, Maxwell guided the Japanese delegation through Reed Innovations' Tokyo expansion strategy. His presentation was flawless, addressing every concern, anticipating every question. Eleanor watched with growing confusion as Maxwell masterfully closed the deal they'd been pursuing for months. When the contracts were signed, and the visitors, escorted to a celebratory lunch with other executives, Eleanor cornered Maxwell in the conference room. What game are you playing? She demanded. Yesterday you were ready to throw away this deal for those children, and today you're the consummate CO. Maxwell straightened his tie calmly. I realized something important, Eleanor. I don't have to choose between my family and this company. Of course you do, Eleanor scoffed. You can't serve 2 masters. No, Maxwell agreed. That's why I'm calling an emergency board meeting this afternoon. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. On what grounds? To discuss a change in leadership, Maxwell said simply. For the first time in Maxwell's memory, Eleanor Reed looked genuinely shocked. The Reed Innovations boardroom had never felt so tense. 12 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, eyes darting between Maxwell and Eleanor as if watching a high-stakes tennis match. "This emergency meeting has been called by CEO Maxwell Reed," the corporate secretary announced formally. "Mr. Reed, you have the floor." Maxwell stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I've called this meeting to discuss the future leadership of Reed Innovations." Eleanor's face remained impassive, though her knuckles whitened as she gripped her pen. "As you know," Maxwell continued, "I've recently discovered I have 3 sons. This has naturally led to changes in my personal life. My stepmother believes these changes make me unsuitable to lead this company." A murmur rippled through the room. "What my stepson fails to mention," Eleanor interjected smoothly, "is that these children appeared conveniently after our stock price tripled last quarter." "DNA tests confirm they are mine," Maxwell replied calmly. "But that's not why we're here. We're here because Reed Innovations needs to decide what kind of company it will be going forward." Maxwell distributed folders to each board member. These contained 2 proposals. The first is my plan for restructuring senior leadership to allow me to balance my family and professional responsibilities without compromising either. "And the second?" asked Sophia Chen, the longest-serving board member after Eleanor. "My resignation as CEO, effective immediately," Maxwell said quietly. The room erupted in surprised exclamations. Eleanor looked triumphant. "The choice is simple," Maxwell continued when order was restored. "Either Reed Innovations evolves into a company that values work-life balance at all levels, starting from the top, or I step down to focus on what matters most to me now." "This is emotional blackmail," Eleanor snapped. Maxwell turned to his stepmother. "No, Eleanor, this is clarity, something I've recently discovered after living in the fog of your expectations for 20 years. He addressed the board again. "I've given everything to this company. My youth, my marriage, years I can never get back. I won't sacrifice my children too." Eleanor stood abruptly. "This is precisely my point. His priorities have shifted. Reed Innovations needs a CEO who puts the company first. Always." "Like you did?" Maxwell challenged. "Tell them, Eleanor. Tell them how you've used company resources to investigate my ex-wife, how you enlisted our legal counsel to spy on my family, and create false evidence for a custody battle I never wanted." The board members looked shocked. Eleanor's face flushed with anger. "I was protecting this company from a gold digger and her—" "Careful," Maxwell interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "Those are my children you're talking about." Sophia Chen cleared her throat. "I think we need to separate several issues here. The personal situation between Mr. Reed and his stepmother is distasteful, but secondary to the governance question." She studied Maxwell carefully. "Your first proposal, the restructuring. You believe you can effectively lead this company while being present for your family?" "I do," Maxwell answered confidently. "I've outlined a plan to promote 3 senior VPs to share operational responsibilities while I focus on strategic direction and major client relationships. It's a modern approach many successful companies have adopted." "And if we don't accept this proposal?" another board member asked. "Then I walk away," Maxwell said simply. "I've made my fortune. I've built this company from a regional player to a global force, but I won't miss another moment of my son's childhoods for any amount of money or power." Eleanor scoffed. "Such nobility. Where was this family devotion when you drove Jessica away 5 years ago?" "I was wrong then," Maxwell admitted. "I was. The man you raised me to be, putting profit above people, success above relationships. But I've changed." "People don't change," Eleanor insisted. "They do when they discover what truly matters," Maxwell countered. Maxwell turned back to the board. "I respect each of you, and I respect this company enough to give you a choice. But I've already made mine." With that, Maxwell gathered his papers and walked out, leaving stunned silence behind him. Outside the building, Maxwell loosened his tie and took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. For the first time in his adult life, he felt truly free. Whatever the board decided, he knew his path forward. His phone rang. "Jessica, how did it go?" she asked. concern evident in her voice. Maxwell had told her about Thomas's betrayal and his confrontation with Eleanor. "I don't know yet," he replied honestly. "But it doesn't matter. I'm picking up the boys from school, then coming over. We need to talk." "Is everything okay?" Maxwell smiled, watching the setting sun paint the skyscrapers gold. "Everything is finally exactly as it should be." "Dad, watch this," Wesley called, executing a wobbly cartwheel across the grass in Central Park. Maxwell applauded enthusiastically from his seat on a park bench. "That was at least 50% better than last week," he encouraged, making Wesley beam with pride. It had been 3 weeks since the board meeting, and Maxwell's life had transformed completely. The board had ultimately accepted his restructuring proposal with a few modifications and a 6-month trial period. Sophia Chen had been instrumental, persuading the more conservative members that evolving their leadership model would position Reed Innovations as a progressive, family-friendly company. Eleanor had been furious. She remained chairwoman, but her influence had diminished considerably after the revelation of her tactics against Jessica and the children. "How's the new schedule working out?" Jessica asked, sitting beside Maxwell as they watched the boys play. "Better than I expected," Maxwell admitted. 3 days in the office, 2 working remotely. The Tokyo deal is finalized, and client feedback has been positive about the leadership changes. Jessica studied him. "You seem different, more relaxed." Maxwell smiled. "Turns out I don't actually have to control everything personally for the company to function." "Who would have thought?" Jessica teased, nudging his shoulder lightly. This new camaraderie between them still felt fragile but precious. Maxwell treasured these moments of easy conversation, so different from their bitter parting 5 years ago. "I've been looking at houses," Maxwell said. "In this neighborhood. Something bigger than my penthouse, with a yard if possible." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Giving up Manhattan? That's a big step." "The penthouse never felt like home," Maxwell confessed. "It was just a place to sleep between meetings. I want somewhere the boys will feel comfortable with rooms of their own when they stay over." "They'd like that," Jessica said softly. "They talk about you constantly now." Maxwell watched as Parker helped Connor adjust his stance for pitching a baseball. "They're amazing kids, Jessica. You did that. You raised them to be kind, smart, resilient." "We did get one thing right," she agreed. A comfortable silence fell between them as they observed their sons at play. Maxwell marveled at how quickly children adapted. Just over a month ago, he'd been a stranger to them. Now they incorporated him into their lives as if he'd always been there. "The school called yesterday," Jessica said, changing the subject. "They want to move Parker to the gifted program." "That's wonderful," Maxwell replied, "though I'm not surprised. The questions he asks about how things work, he reminds me of myself at that age." "They all do," Jessica observed. "Connor has your determination, Wesley your creativity." Maxwell laughed. "And all of them have my stubbornness, unfortunately." Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas Porter approaching hesitantly across the grass. Maxwell tensed immediately. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Thomas held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I just need 5 minutes, Maxwell, please." Jessica looked between them, confusion evident. "What's going on?" "It's okay," Maxwell assured her. "Why don't you gather the boys? I'll meet you at the ice cream cart in a few minutes." After Jessica walked away, Maxwell turned to Thomas with cold fury. "I told you to stay away from my family." "I know," Thomas said, looking genuinely remorseful. "I came to apologize and to give you this." He handed Maxwell a thick envelope. "What is it?" "My resignation from Reed Innovations," Thomas replied. "And copies of everything Eleanor asked me to do regarding Jessica and the boys. If she tries anything else, you'll have ammunition." Maxwell studied his former friend. "Why the change of heart?" Thomas looked toward the boys in the distance. "I've been Eleanor's puppet for years, telling myself it was for my career. Watching you choose your family over everything, it made me realize how empty my own life has become." Maxwell didn't immediately respond, conflicted about the man who had been both friend and betrayer. "I don't expect forgiveness," Thomas continued. But I wanted you to know I'm not a threat anymore." He turned to leave. "Thomas," Maxwell called after him. "We were friends once. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." As Thomas walked away, Maxwell felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He joined Jessica and the boys at the ice cream cart, smiling as Connor debated the merits of chocolate versus vanilla with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. "Everything okay?" Jessica asked quietly. Maxwell watched his sons, these miracles he'd nearly missed knowing. "Everything is perfect," he answered, and meant it. Maxwell's new brownstone in Park Slope had transformed from an empty shell to a home in just 2 months. The walls, once stark white, now displayed framed artwork from the boys and family photos. The formal dining room had become a hybrid space with a large table for meals and 3 small desks for homework. "Dad, where does this go?" Parker asked, holding up a model rocket they'd built together. "That's for your bedroom shelf," Maxwell replied, helping him carefully carry it upstairs. The boys were spending their first weekend in the new house, each with their own bedroom that they'd helped decorate. Wesley's walls were covered in dinosaur-themed decals, Connor's in sports posters, and Parker's in bookshelves already filling with science books. Jessica had been surprisingly helpful with the move, offering advice on child-friendly furniture and practical storage solutions. There was an unspoken understanding between them that this wasn't just Maxwell's home, but an extension of the family they were carefully rebuilding. Maxwell was arranging books in the living room when the doorbell rang. Expecting the pizza delivery he'd ordered, he was shocked to find Eleanor Reed on his doorstep. "Eleanor," Maxwell said, unable to hide his surprise. They hadn't spoken outside a formal board meeting since the confrontation 2 months earlier. "May I come in?" Eleanor asked. Stiffly, Maxwell hesitated, then stepped aside. "The boys are upstairs," he warned quietly. Eleanor nodded, following Maxwell into the living room. The older woman looked out of place among the colorful throw pillows and children's games. "So this is where the CEO of Reed Innovations lives now," Eleanor observed, running a finger along a bookshelf. "Quite a change from your penthouse." "It suits me better," Maxwell replied simply. "Why are you here, Eleanor?" Before his stepmother could answer, thundering footsteps announced the arrival of the triplets racing down the stairs. "Dad, is the pizza?" Connor stopped abruptly upon seeing the stranger. Wesley and Parker nearly collided with him. "Boys," Maxwell said, "this is my stepmother, Eleanor Reed." 3 pairs of green eyes identical to Eleanor's own stared at her with undisguised curiosity. "You're our dad's stepmother?" Wesley asked. "So you're our step-grandmother?" A flicker of emotion crossed Eleanor's usually stoic face. "Yes, I suppose. I am." "Are you old?" Parker inquired bluntly. "Parker?" Maxwell admonished gently. "That's not polite." "I'm 63, Eleanor answered, surprising Maxwell with her patience. "Old enough to remember when your father was your age." This revelation captivated the boys. "What was Dad like when he was little?" Connor asked, momentarily forgetting his usual caution around strangers. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "He was very much like you 3, curious, determined, always asking questions." "Did he like rockets?" Parker pressed. "Model rockets," Eleanor corrected. "We used to launch them in Central Park on Sunday mornings." Maxwell stared at his stepmother in disbelief. He hadn't thought about those Sunday mornings in decades, before his parents' accident, before Eleanor transformed from fun stepmother to stern guardian. The doorbell rang again, this time actually the pizza delivery. Maxwell excused himself to answer it, leaving Eleanor with the boys. When he returned with the pizza boxes, he found Eleanor seated on the couch with Parker showing her a complex Lego structure. "Eleanor was telling us about Grandpa," Connor explained. "They were brothers like us, except there were only 2 of them." "Your father had a twin brother too," Eleanor said. "James, who works at the company." Maxwell tensed. "James isn't with the company anymore." Eleanor nodded. "I know. That's partly why I'm here." She turned to the boys. "Would you mind if I spoke with your father privately for a few minutes?" The triplets looked to Maxwell for guidance. He nodded reassuringly. "Go," Wash your hands for pizza. I'll call you when we're done. After they raced upstairs, Eleanor sighed heavily. They're remarkable children, Maxwell. Yes, they are, Maxwell agreed cautiously. They look so much like you and your father, Eleanor continued. Seeing them, it brought back memories I thought I'd buried years ago. Maxwell waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. I've been thinking about what you said at the board meeting, Eleanor admitted. About how I raised you to put profit above people. You were right. The admission stunned Maxwell. Eleanor Reed never admitted being wrong about anything. After your parents died, I was terrified of failing them, of failing you, Eleanor continued. I thought if I could make you successful, wealthy, powerful, I'd have done my duty. I never considered whether I was making you happy. You did the best you could, Maxwell said quietly. Eleanor shook her head. No, I didn't. I turned you into a reflection of myself, and I nearly cost you the chance to be a better father than I was a mother. For the first time in Maxwell's memory, Eleanor Reed looked vulnerable. I'd like to know them, Eleanor said finally. My great-nephews, if you'll allow it. 1 year later, Maxwell Reed stood in the backyard of his brownstone, watching his sons blow out 6 candles on their birthday. Cake. The party was in full swing, children running and shouting in the afternoon sun while parents chatted nearby. Jessica appeared beside him, handing him a cup of punch. Can you believe it's been a year since that night at Brasserie Lumière? Maxwell shook his head, amazed at how completely his life had transformed. Reed Innovations was thriving under the new leadership model. Eleanor had become a devoted great-aunt, showing up regularly with educational gifts and taking a special interest in Parker's budding interest in engineering. Most surprisingly, Maxwell and Jessica had begun cautiously exploring the possibility of rebuilding their relationship, not just as co-parents but perhaps as something more. Dad, Wesley called, can we open presents now? As Maxwell walked toward his sons, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Once he had measured his worth by the billions in his bank account, the deals he closed, the power he wielded. Now he understood the true measure of wealth, the love of 3 little boys with his eyes, the second chance with Jessica he'd never expected, and the family he'd nearly lost but had been fortunate enough to find again.